All right, good morning. I'm going to stop Reb Tzaddik a few moments early to get a little bit of a head start. Such a powerful piece. Anyway, let's begin by thanking our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, to thank Adam and Yudit Benzev for dedicating all the Shuman Drushos this month in honor of their children, Jake, Sarina, and Rosie. To thank our Week of Learning sponsor, Yudit and Jennifer Goodhart, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Jennifer's father, Yeshaya Zalman Ben Lazar. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas, Shama have an Aliyah and the family in the Chama. With that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Incredible daf today. Today's daf is Samech Zayin 67. And we are picking up, we left off in the middle of the strange exchange with Rabbi Eliezer. So we left off Samech Vav Amud Beis. Let's pick up Ma'u Lahatzil Roa B'Kivsa, or Roa Kivsa Minari. So Rabbi say it's halfway down. Yeah, right halfway down. It's halfway down. Ma'al Hatzuro keeps a minari. So both say again, they asked Rabbi Eliezer, are you allowed to go ahead? What's the halacha with the shepherd saving the sheep from the lion? Rabbi said there's a lot of discussion over here exactly what they're talking about when it comes to this particular case. Tosas explains that they were asking Rabbi Eliezer a question regarding David HaMelech, the episode with David HaMelech and Bathsheba. And again, getting into all the technicalities of the nature of David HaMelech's behavior with Bathsheba. Calling Bathsheba the sheep, David HaMelech ultimately again is the lion, and Uriah called the roa. So they're asking David HaMelech a veiled question regarding the behavior of David HaMelech. They're asking Rabbi Eliezer a veiled question regarding the behavior of David HaMelech. Lo shaltuni ela ala kivsa. So Rabbi Eliezer responds to them, why are you only asking me about the sheep? Okay, so they said to him, fine. Can you go ahead and save the shepherd from the lion? You're only asking me about the shepherd. So once again, Rabbi Eliezer is being evasive and not answering the question. Mamzer, mahuli yaresh. We'll say interesting shaila. Is a mamzer yoresh's father? A mamzer yoresh's father. And we'll say we're not using that as a descriptive term, like a kid who's a mamzer, but rather mamish like a kid who is a mamzer, a halachic term, right? So again, this is not like can you write your mamzer kid out of your will. This is if a child is halachically a mamzer, so do they have the dine Yerusha or not? It's a fascinating question. So mamzer mahuli yaresh, mahuli yabe. I both say, listen to this. Is there a din of yibum with a mamzer brother? Or in other words, or I should say, if a brother died and the surviving brother is a mamzer, again, not descriptive, halachic. So again, is there a din of yibum? Does that surviving mamzer brother have a din of yibum? So mahuli, I'm sorry, I'm asking, I said that wrong. So mamzer mahuli yaresh. So they asked Rabbi Eliezer, does a mamzer yarshin his father? So Rabbi Eliezer says, mahuli yabim. Does a mamzer do yibum? So once again, Rabbi Eliezer is not answering the question. Every time they ask him a question, that he goes in and asks a different question. Mal loso des beso. So they ask Rabbi Eliezer, are you permitted to go ahead and plaster your home? That I will say, Rashi says over here, Mal loso des beso, bizman hazeh mi aser mipnei tsar churban habayis. Both say, there is a halacha that says that bizman hazeh, one is supposed to leave an amma by amma square open in their home, zecher lechurban. And the Gemara says that we're not supposed to use this very bright white type of white plaster to plaster our homes, zecher lechurban. So they were asking Rabbi Eliezer, are you allowed to plaster your home with this very bright white plaster now that there's no Beis HaMikdash? So Rabbi Eliezer responded, Mo l'asur es kivro. Obviously, if we have time, I'll come back to that. It's actually fascinating because it's halach and Shulchan Aruch that you're supposed to leave an amma by amma square unfinished on your home. And yet, again, in Eretz Yisrael, you see this all the time. But outside of Eretz Yisrael, rarely do you see it. So what's the pshat? So the Aruch HaShulchan says something amazing. He says the din of amma by amma was dafka only a din in the bright white plaster that they used to use. But the Aruch HaShulchan says because no one uses that bright white plaster anymore, the din of amma by amma is no longer in effect. That's what the Aruch HaShulchan said. Interesting idea. In any event, so the Gemara says, so mal v'yaser beso, mal v'yaser kivro. So they asked him, what's the halacha with plastering your home with the white plaster? And now that there's no Beis HaMikdash, and he said, are you allowed to plaster a grave? Remember again, they used to plaster the graves in order to go ahead and demarcate the area where a grave was. So we'll say the Gemara says Rabbi Eliezer was asked a ton of questions, deflected every single one of them. Why? Lo mipnei shefligun bidvarim. Rabbi Eliezer was not trying to be difficult. Ela mipnei shelo amar davar shelo shama mipi rabo miolam. We'll say, listen to this. Rabbi Eliezer never said something that he did not hear in the name of his Rebbe. He never said something that he did not hear in the name of his Rebbe. And therefore, again, he simply would not answer the questions. I will say, B'Pashtos, according to most opinions, the Rabbi Eliezer being mentioned over here is Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. Who was Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus' Rebbe? There was Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? Two Rebbeim. So interestingly enough, he never said anything that he did not hear from his Rebbe. Now, you'll say to yourself, okay, so there's an easier way to deal with this. What's the easier way to deal with this? Rabbi Eliezer, somebody asks you a kasha, what do you say? I don't have a Masorah for this. But so here's what's interesting. People often remember things. People often remember strange things more than they remember normal things. So the fact that Rabbi Eliezer never answers these questions directly, but instead deflects, everybody remembers that. Then once the Gemara explains his behavior, everyone understands that this Talmud would not say something over the name of his Rebbe. Masha'ekin, it's possible that if he just said, I don't have a Masorah, people wouldn't remember that this was his principled stance with answering shilas. But in any event, Rabbi Eliezer was incredibly makbid, never to say anything over, not in the name of his Rebbe. Shal was another example. Shal Isha Chachmas Rabbi Eliezer. Me'achar shemasa egel shavin, mipnei ma'in misasan shavin. So there was a particular woman who asked Rabbi Eliezer the following kasha. The people who worshipped the egel, Rabbi say, there were three different punishments for the egel. There were people who were put to death by sword. There are people who died in a plague, and there are people who we're going to see who died with a machla, with an ailment called hidarkon. Right? Hidarkon was some type of stomach ailment. So this woman asked Rabbi Eliezer, if everyone is going ahead and kind of culpable in the same way, why were there three different punishments? Amar Allah, so once I hear he responded a little bit more sharply, Ein chachma li'isha ela beplach. A woman, right? There is no chachma for a woman except with the spindle. So we'll say, so again, this happens to get into another discussion about whether or not women should engage in Talmud Torah. A different discussion. Rabbi Eliezer was clearly of the opinion that women should not engage in Talmud Torah. V'shinamtam levanecha v'lo libnosecha. This was one of the positions of Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore he was a bit more dismissive of this question. Now again, it's the same. It's brought down here because it's the same as Rabbi Eliezer did not answer because halacha lamaisa didn't have a Masorah. He didn't have a tradition from his Rebbe about how to answer this. But lamaisa, it's also reflective of a different view about the role of women in Talmud Torah. Itmar, so we'll say, once the Gemara brought this up, the Gemara says, Itmar, Rav Alevi, Chad Amar Zibach V'Kiter B'Sayif. So we'll say, others explain that there was a fundamental distinction on how people were punished when it came to the Chet HaEgel. So one said, for example, Zibach V'Kiter, if a person literally offered a carbon or Kitoras to the Egel, B'Sayif, they were put to death by sword. Gafaf V'Nishek B'Misa, if you hugged and kissed the Egel, you died in a plague. Samach bilavavo, if you didn't do anything external, but were happy in your heart for the egel, behidarkon, or I should say behidrokon, with this stomach ailment. V'chad amar, other opinions said no, the three different punishments were, v'chad amar, edim basra b'sayif, if there were witnesses, and hasra, a person was put to death by sword. Edim below hasra b'misa, if there are witnesses, but no hasra, plague. Lo edim v'lo hasra behidrokan. If there are no edim, no hasra, then hidrokan, the stomach ailment. Amar Yehuda, Shivto shal Levi lo avad avodas kochavin. Both say first wide line, samich vav amud beis. Shevet Levi did not worship the egel. They didn't worship Avodah Zarah. Shene Arabos. By the way, the Gemara over here reflecting, in general, there is a whole machlokes about the nature of the Chet HaEgel. Was it actually a sin of Avodah Zarah or not? That itself is a machlokes. Psukim seem to clearly indicate when they say Elo Elohecha Yisrael, but again, even Elohecha, some Mefarshim understand as a leader as opposed to God. In any event, the Gemara clearly reflects the view over here that the Egel was Avodah Zarah. Shevet Levi did not participate in Avodah Zarah. Shneimar Vayamo Moshe B'Shara Machane, because the pasuk says Moshe Rabbeinu stood at the edge of the camp, and he said, Mila Hashem Elai, and who joined him? Vayasvu Elav Kol B'nei Levi. And it was B'nei Levi ultimately again who joined him. And I will say, it says, Kol B'nei Levi. So Shevet Levi did not worship Avodah Zarah. Yosef Ravina V'Kamar L'Hashmaisa, so Ravina gave over the following ruling. So the Gemara says, Isvei B'nei Rav Papa Bar Abba Ravina. So we'll say, so the sons of Rav Papa, asked the following question. Ha'omer la'aviv uli'imo lo re'isiv. So we'll say, here's the problem. The problem is, you made it sound, Ravina, you're saying all of Shevet Levi did not worship Avodah Zarah. But then the pasuk goes on to say, Omer, who said, la'aviv uli'imo lo re'isiv. He did not see his father and his mother. Now, this pasuk is referring to the fact that Shevet Levi were the ones who carried out the killing of people who did worship Avodah Zarah. And the pasuk says that when the Leviim were carrying out the punishment of killing people who worshipped the Egel, they didn't see their father, they didn't see their mother, which sounds like they even executed their own relatives. Now, the relative of a Levi presumably is a Levi. So it sounds like Leviim did worship Avodah Zarah, to which the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Aviv is Avi Imo Yisrael. Aviv could be his maternal grandfather, who could very easily be Yisrael. Achiv, his brother. Achiv Me'imo, a maternal brother, who doesn't have to be a Levi. Mi Yisrael Banav, who are his children. Bnei Bito Mi Yisrael, his daughter's children, who could be Yisrael. So we'll say the idea is the Torah refers to that unfortunately the relatives of the Leviim had to pick up arms against their own relatives, but not Levi relatives, because the entire Shevet Levi did not worship Avodah Zarah. It could be, unfortunately, they had to pick up arms against their Yisrael relatives. Incredible. But we'll say, let's go weiter. So the Gemara says, V'kevesh asulos. Remember again, the Mishnah said they made a ramp. They made a ramp to get the Ish Iti out of Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, Amra Barachana. So let's remember again, and why is that? Because the Mishnah says that the Babylonians, the Bavliim, used to tear at the hair. Whose hair? We'll see. They used to tear at the hair and say, "Get out, get out." So in order to allow the Ish Iti to get out of Yerushalayim unharmed, they built a ramp. Amra Barachana lo Bavliim hayu ela Alexandria. Also, it's interesting, by the way. You think to yourself, what crazy behavior? What crazy behavior, right? It's Yom Kippur. I got it. Everybody's eager for the seer to get out, right? But you're yelling on Yom Kippur. Right? It's just so strange. You're yelling on Yom Kippur in the Beis Hamikdash. You're pulling out the goat's hair. You're pulling out the guy's hair. You're pulling some hair, right? What's the Shabbos said? I just want to point out to you. I don't know if you saw. It was a very disturbing. There was, I think it was last week or so. I think it was the women of the wall who came to daven at the Kosel, and they were surrounded by a group of young men and harassed and yelled at, and their siddurim were torn up. I'll go on record saying I don't agree with the women of the wall, but what I disagree more with is mistreating people at the holiest site of the Jewish people. You see, I will say it's an interesting thing, because wherever there is Kedusha, there is also the greatest capacity for Tumah. And wherever the place where there's the greatest capacity for Achdus is also the very same place where there is the greatest capacity for Sinas Chilam. It's an incredible thing. It's an incredible thing that you see sometimes, again, in the holiest places, the most outrageous behaviors could occur. It's always, Rav Kook, Rav Am Yisrael Kohen Kook, very quickly, says this is the pshat. Where do we learn this from? When Yaakov and Esau are in the womb together and they're fighting, and Rav Kook, the Maral HaPrag, also says this, that kind of like good and evil can't occupy the same space. And wherever there is an incredible intensity of good, there's always a pushback. And it's that back and forth. Wherever there is the greatest Kedusha, is also the greatest capacity for Tumah. Wherever there is the greatest capacity for Achdus, is also the greatest capacity for Sinas Chinam. So here it's Yom Kippur in the Beis HaMikdash, and they have to build a ramp because people are just behaving inappropriately. It's Yom Kippur. We'll say Yom Kippur is the one day where hold it together. Hold it together. The guy's going to go. He's going to get there. Everybody wants him to get there. The Kohen Gadol is sending him on his way. Hold it together. Yet for some reason, where there is the greatest capacity for Kedusha, also the greatest capacity for outrageous behavior. So anyway, the Gemara says, Lo Bavliim havu ela Alexandrian. Oh, good news. It wasn't Babylonians. No, it wasn't Babylonians. It was the Alexandrian Jews. Okay. Umitoch shesonim es Bavliim. But because the Jews of Eretz Yisrael hated the Babylonians so much, Hayukorin Osan al Shman. See, I will say, in Eretz Yisrael, when somebody did something stupid or terrible, he's a Babylonian. What a Babylonian, right? That was like the most disparaging thing you could call a person, was a Babylonian. So what happens? It wasn't the Babylonian Jews who actually did this. It was the Alexandrian Jews who did this. But because the Jews of Eretz Yisrael despised the Jews from Babel so much, they called these people who acted inappropriately Babylonians. We'll say, is it not heartbreaking to read these words? Is it not heartbreaking to read these words? And these words, that sinah is memorialized, right? It's here. These words are forever, right? We'll say, this is nitzchi. Everything else in our lives is fleeting. And everything else in our lives comes and goes. One thing I can guarantee you is that your children and your great-grandchildren and your great-great-great-great-grandchildren are all going to have the same Daf Yoma Daf Samech Vav Amud Beis. These words are here forever. And these words highlight the sinas chinam of Am Yisrael. We read it so matter-of-factly. Oh yeah, the Jews of Eretz Yisrael hated the Jews of Babel. Hated the Jews of Babel. See, anyone who behaved in an inappropriate way, they called them Babylonians. How careful we have to be with how we treat each other, and how careful we have to be to disagree agreeably, and how careful we have to be to try to figure out how to get along, even if we can't see eye to eye in the most core of issues, and to never have these type of words written about us. The Gemara says, Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo Bavlim Hayu, Ela Alexandrium Hayu. You're right, they weren't Babylonian Jews, they were Alexandrian Jews. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Tanuach daita shineach es daiti. Rabbi Yossi essentially said, whew, right? He breathed a sigh of relief. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi was from Babel. He was from a very prominent Babylonian family. And when he heard that the Babylonians would do this, he was very distressed. But what? When he really heard it wasn't the Babylonians, it was just the Alexandrians. But they called the Babylonians because everyone hates the Babylonians. He said, I feel much better. Baruch Hashem, at least it wasn't really the Babylonians. So we're saying the take-home message is how much we have to work on our sinas chinam, and how much we have to work on our avas chinam, and how many bridges we have to make, because we can never, these words are here in print and forever part of our Torah Sheba'al Peh, is a tragic mistake of Klal Yisrael. We must make sure to never repeat these tragic mistakes again. Says the Mishnah, Tol v'tzei, they would tell the guy, get out, go, Tana, ma shoi tzefira din v'chovi dara sagian. What they told the Ish'iti was, why are you going ahead and delaying taking the seir, when ultimately, again, all of the averos of Klal Yisrael are still here. So they would tell him, they were very eager to get him to go. The seir is mechaper, and if they felt that he was tarrying or delaying, they would tell him, listen, there is work for the seir to do, ultimately, again, because the sins of Am Yisrael are great. All right, well, say incredible. Good, let's get to today's daf. Excellent. Says the Mishnah, Miakir Yerushalayim hayu malavin osat tzukar rishon. So we'll say, so now again, just to pick up, the Ishiti has left. He's left. He's gone over the ramp. He has now exited the city of Yerushalayim. So we'll say now he is going to a cliff in the midbar. He's going to a cliff in the midbar. So the Gemara says, Me'ekir Yerushalayim hayu malavin also ad sukkah harishona, until the first sukkah. We'll say we're going to wait until the first sukkah. Sukkah in this case, we'll say not a halachic sukkah, just a hut. Eser sukkos Yerushalayim tzuk. We'll say they set up 10 huts from Yerushalayim until the tzuk. Tzuk is the cliff from which they pushed the Seir LaAzazel off, top of Samech Zayin. Tishim Ris, the distance between Yerushalayim, ultimately again, and the cliff was 90 Ris. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Tishim Ris, Sheva Omechza L'chol Mil. Right, 7.5 Ris per mil. Al Kol Sukkah V'Sukkah Omrim Lo, and at every hut, they said to him as follows. Hari Mazon V'Hari Mayim. They said to him, there's bread, there's water, and food. In other words, both say, technically speaking, the Ishiti was allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. He was allowed to eat on Yom Kippur because his mission was so critical to get to the Seir, to the cliff, and to push it off, that Allah L'Maisa, he was even permitted to go ahead and eat and drink. So in every hut, they had food and drink for him, and they said to him, Hari Mazon V'Hari Mayim, here's food, here's drink. Umalavin also, Misukkah L'Sukkah. And they would escort him. So we'll say, it's interesting. There were people, not only was there a hut set up with food, but there were people in these huts from before Yom Kippur. They spent Yom Kippur in the hut. And their entire job was to kind of welcome the Ishiti, offer him food and drink, and then escort him to the next hut. Chutz mi'achron shevayim, with the exception of the last hut, the person in the last hut, she'eno magia imo l'tzuk. We'll see, because the last hut was really outside of the tchum of the cliff. So whereas every hut, hut A was able to, the person from hut A was able to malave, escort the ish iti to hut B, and so on and so forth. The last hut could not escort the ish iti to the edge of the cliff because the edge of the cliff was out of the tchum. Rather, what would happen? The guy from the last hut would stand at a distance and watch the Kohen Gadol as he performed the avodah of the Siyar Mishtaleach. Mahaya Oseh. What would the ish iti, right? What would he do ultimately, again, when he got the goat to the edge of the cliff? Cholik lashon shel zehuris. He would take a piece of red wool and split it in half. Chatziav kasher b'sela. Half of the wool he would go ahead and tie on a rock by the edge of the cliff. V'chatziav kosher ben shnei karnov. And then the other part he would tie between the horns of the goat. V'dochvu la'achorov. And he would go ahead and he would push the goat backwards. Push the goat backwards. I will say there are two reasons for pushing the goat backwards. There's probably a simple utilitarian one, which is what? Right? If the goat sees where it's going to be pashtos, it's not going to say, oh, thank you. Right? It's probably going to put up a fight. Right? And number two, we're going to see that the Ish Iti Dafka wanted to see what would happen, if possible, to the string in between the goat's horns. We'll discuss this in just a moment. And the goat would tumble down the side of the cliff. By the time already the goat was halfway down, it already broke apart, right? It splintered apart into limbs. After this is done, now the Ish Iti does not go back to Yerushalayim. Instead, what he does is, he spends the remainder of Yom Kippur in the last hut, until nightfall, and then he comes back. And I will say, at what point in time does the clothing of the Ish Iti ultimately again become tummy? Because I will say this is a pasuk. Rashi calls the pasuk v'mashalech es haseir yichabeis bigadav. We'll say the pasuk says the person who takes the seir out literally again will launder his clothing. Laundering his clothing, of course, is a reference to tuma. So when does he become tamei? As soon as they leave Yerushalayim, ultimately you become Tamei. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Mishas Dichyaso Lutzuk. Rabbi Shimon argues and he says, no, you don't become Tamei until you actually go ahead and push the goat off the cliff. Incredible. So we'll say, let's analyze. Tan Rabbanon, Eser Sukkos, Ushnei Asar Milin Hayu, Div Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says there were 10 Sukkos and a distance of 12 mil. Rabbi Huda Omer, Tesha Sukkos, Va'asara Milin. Rabbi Yehuda says there were 9 sukkos and 10 mil. Rabbi Yossi Omer Chamish sukkos va'asara milin. Rabbi Yossi 5 huts, 10 mil. Hayu v'kulan ayidei eruv. And the truth is, all of them could be connected through an eruv. Am Rabbi Yossi Sachli Elazar b'ni im ayidei eruv. If you're going to use an eruv, yicholani la'asos afilu shtei sukkos va'asara milin. I can go ahead and even bridge the entire distance of 10 milin with 2 sukkos. So kiman azla hadisanya, whose opinion is reflected in the following statement. Chutzni achron shvan shlagiyim olatzuk. Now remember again, the guy from the last hut could not accompany the ish iti to the edge of the cliff. Who does that reflect? He stood at a distance. Kiman ki Rabbi Meir. Ultimately, again, both reflects the view of Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, so the Rambam accepts the approach as espoused in the Mishnah, namely that the distance between Yerushalayim and the cliff was 90 ris. So we'll say the Rambam Perush HaMishnayos writes that 90 ris is 12 mil. Is 12 mil. If we go, now there's a machlokes about how much a mil is. It's somewhere between 0.5 and 0.7 miles. But if you go ahead and you say, if you just go with the basic calculation of 0.5, it turns out that the Ish Iti walked 6 miles. 6 miles from I will say, now, it's probably not 6 miles from the Beis HaMikdash, but 6 miles from the edge of the city of Yerushalayim. So again, it's a doable walk. It's definitely a doable walk. It is Yom Kippur. It is hot, and he has a goat, right? But aside from all that, it's a doable walk. But that 6 miles. So we'll say that's what is. They actually, you can go. There is a mountain. I forgot. There's another name for it today. I went there. One of my last trips to Eretz Yisrael. You could take a jeep ride up to what they say is Har HaZazel, right? This is the mountain where they went ahead, and it's about this distance right out of Yerushalayim, about 6 miles or so out of Yerushalayim. Obviously, the topography is a little bit different today, but Lamaisa, you could walk it, and you could understand when you see it, you begin to understand why they had these sukkos. Because we'll say Lamaisa, again, this was a trek. right? This, you know how tired, we know how tired we get just by sitting in shul all day, right? In other words, I'm not even doing anything. I mean, hopefully I'm doing something, but Lamaisa, I'm not doing anything active, right? And yet again, I'm exhausted. So Ishiti, 6 miles, heat of the summer, not the heat of the summer, but the heat of Eretz Yisrael still good. So Gemara goes right. So we'll say every sukkah they told him, Ishiti, here's something to eat, here's something to drink. Tana, we'll say, listen to this Gemara. Me'olam lo hutzrach adam lakach. Never in the history of the Beis HaMikdash did anyone ever eat or drink in one of the sukkos. Never ate or drank. So why do they have it? Ella sheina dome mishi yeshel pas besalo lemisha ein lo pas besalo. Both says a beautiful Gemara, because the Gemara says you can't compare someone who has bread in his basket to someone who does not have bread in his basket. In other words, both say that sometimes the knowledge that I can eat if I need to, right? The knowledge that I can drink if I need to is enough to settle my mind. Pastor, I will say we find this concept both in halacha as well as in hashkafa. I will say I want to share with you the Marsha just very quickly. We have enough time to do all this. So the Gemara says the Marsha will say it's just a one-line Marsha. The Marsha says Hari Mazon, Birushami Kamar Amali Hari Maimun Mazon. All right, so it's interesting machlok is in the Bavli Yerushalmi. In the Bavli the lashon is Hari Mazon v'Hari Mayim. Here's food, here's water. In the Yerushalmi, it's Hari Mayim, Hari Mazon. All right, so an interesting idea. There's a divrei hashkafim better than that also as well. Mazon, Mayim, Mazon. But listen to this comment to the Marsha. He says She'ein hayetzer hara ta'if ela davar shehu asrlo. Because at the end of the day, the only thing we really desire is what? Are the things that are forbidden. The forbidden fruit is always sweeter. Why do I, right? I'm never hungry at 9 o'clock in the morning. But incredibly Yom Kippur, you can hear my stomach growling from a mile away. What's the pshat? Because I can't eat, right? Pas b'sala, because forbidden fruit is always sweeter. So the incredible part of it, is they tell the guy, you could eat, you could drink. So I guarantee you, how did it happen with the Ishiti? How did it happen? Probably the same way like it happened when we were young and we first started fasting on Yom Kippur, before you're chayiv, right? What do you tell yourself? I know I could eat another hour. So I had to ishiti next sukkah. And what happens? Finally, he gets to the end. Baruch Hashem. Shabbos says the Marsha, because at the end of the day, we really only desire that which is forbidden. But once it becomes permitted in some fashion, the desire is not the same. Incredible. What would he do? He would take the red thread, split it in two. So Rabbi says, so remember, the Mishnah says he tied part of it on a rock by the edge of the cliff, and part of it between the horns of the seir. Why don't you just tie the entire thread on a rock? Kevan the mitzvah b'soyer dilma kadim umalbin umiyas v'daite. Rabbi say this is incredible. This is incredible because what's going to happen? See, the problem is if you would tie the whole thing on the rock. Rabbi say, remember again, what was the chap of the thread? The goal was that the thread would turn white. If it turned white, that was a sign of divine forgiveness. What was the concern? If you tied the whole thread on the rock, what happened if it turned white before you pushed the seir over the cliff? I mean, halavai, such a thing like that. What could end up happening? You may end up not pushing the seir. So in order to avoid that, they would go ahead and remember, I'm going to both say, there is an avoda of the seir la'azazel, even for argument's sake, if the thread did turn white before he pushed it off the cliff. And even if Akash Baruch Hu himself told you all is forgiven, there is still a mitzvah to push the seir off the cliff. I have an akre kulei ben karnov, so why don't you put the entire thread between the horns of the goat? In other words, don't tie anything to a rock. But say, listen to this, because zimnin degamish le'lerei sheva lava daite. Because Rabbi say, we need it, because what could happen? Sometimes if you just put the whole thread between the horns of the goat, if you push the goat off the cliff and the goat, let's say, bends its head or turns around and you can't see the thread, that's going to be very detrimental. And I was about to say, part of the avoda of Yom Kippur was seeing the red thread turn white. That was part of the avoda. We'll say, can you imagine? We'll say there's a famous word by the Sfas Emes. The Sfas Emes says that right on Motzei Yom Kippur, right in Ma'ariv. There's Ma'ariv on Motzei Yom Kippur. Not everybody knows that, right? But there is Ma'ariv on Motzei Yom Kippur. So I'll say, so it's amazing. In that Ma'ariv, we say Slach Lanu Avinu Ki Chatanu. So says the Sfas Emes, what? Slach Lanu Avinu Ki Chatanu? what could I possibly have done between Hashem Hua Elokim of Ne'ilah and now? Right? What could I possibly have done? I know I didn't eat without a bracha because I didn't eat anything. I probably didn't speak Lashon Hara because I'm too tired to really say anything. So what could I have done? What I was maharer about Avodah Zarah, like what did I do? And the Sasana says something so beautiful. He says, at the end of the day, we've committed the sin of not really believing that we are forgiven. You see, a lot of times we go through life and we like to say, of course, all is forgiven, new start, tabla rasa, blank slate, but we don't really believe it. We don't really believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgives us. We don't really believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a new start. We don't really believe that absolution is attainable for us, and that's a chait. Slach lanu avinu ki chatanu. Forgive me, Hashem, because I don't believe that I actually have the ability to start again. So I will say, in Bizman HaMikdash, you had the ability to tangibly see the Ribono Shel Olam's forgiveness. And isn't that absolutely incredible? So let's look at the Braisa. Tan Rabbanan, Berishona hayakor shalashon shal zahoras hapesach ha'ulam mibachutz. It used to be, Rabbi say, that what would they do? They would go ahead and tie the red string at the entranceway of the ulam. Also remember again, the ulam is the antechamber, right? The large ulam. So they would tie the red string at the entranceway of the antechamber. And what would happen? Hilbin hayu smechin. If it turned white, they were very happy. Lo hilbin hayu atzavin. If it didn't turn white, they were very sad. Umis baishin, and they were embarrassed. Hiskinu, so Rabbi say, what happens? So it turned out that Yom Kippur, see Rabbi say, the whole essence of Yom Kippur is optimism. The problem with the string is it's a double-edged sword. If it turns white, ain optimism gedol mizo. But if it doesn't turn white, it's like, what are we doing? You could imagine the feeling of dejectedness. So what happens? They decided, you know what? We can't put the string in public view. It's better not to. So what would they do? So listen to what they did. They went ahead and they put the string up inside of the ulam. So again, Kohanim could still see it, but the general populace could not see it. So what happens? I will say, what would happen? So Jews are resourceful. So what happens? Somehow, I don't know, whatever, they contorted, they moved, they got better seats, they were able to peer inside of the heichal to see the string. Right? Hilbin hayusmech, and the same problem came up. If it became white, they became very, very simchadik, very happy. Lo hilbin hayu atzav. And if it did not become white, they became sad. Hiskinu sheikoshin also chatzia b'sad v'chatzia ben karnov. So we'll say, at a certain point in time, they stopped putting up the string in the Beis Hamikdash at all. They stopped. And the only place they put it was where? They sent it with the ish iti. He put half of the string between the horns of the goat, and ultimately again half by the rock, and that was it. It was not in public view. Amr Rav Nachum bar Papa Mishum Rabbi Elazar. So we'll say, so again, let's finish this. Amr Rav Nachum bar Papa Mishum Rabbi Elazar Akafar Berishona Hayu Koshin Lashon Shal Zahoris HaPesach Ulam Mibifnim. So we'll say, same idea. They used to tie the string on the entranceway of the ulam on the inside. Kevin shegia sir midbar hayam malbin. As soon as the seer would reach the midbar, ultimately again the string would turn white. The yadu shenasis mitzvah, and they would realize that the avodah of the seer was done and forgiveness was attained. Shneimar imyu chata'ichem kashanim kashala galbinu. So we'll say again, if your sins are crimson red, they will be turned white as snow. So we'll say incredibly beautiful. First, beautiful also to have a tangible display of the Ribono Shel Olam's forgiveness, but also again you see the evolution of the string from outside the ulam to inside the ulam. Ultimately, again, to now only going with the ish iti by the cliff. So I will say, it turned out that by the end of this process, or as we got to the latter part of the Beis Hamikdash era, the string was not put up in the Beis Hamikdash at all, but rather the ish iti would tie half of it between the horns and half of it behind the rock. So I will say, you'll say to yourself, but what happens? What happens if it turns red? Right? If it doesn't turn white, and the ish iti comes back and tells them it didn't turn white, so we'll say, what happens? What happens? So don't we run into a problem? So two things. First of all, he was only coming back when? After Yom Kippur. And I both say an incredible yisod in human mindset, human behavior. People move on. People move on very quickly. In other words, if you were to come back and tell them, I think, that the string did not turn white, right? Okay, Yom Kippur's over. Yom Kippur's over. We'll say an incredible yisod into the way people are. The greatest challenge in life is that we tend to not take our experiences with us. We tend to go ahead and experience things, and then once it's over, it's over. Is this not Maisim B'chol Shana? I have Yom Kippur. How many promises do I make over the course of Yom Kippur? Right? How many Kabbalahs do I make over the course of Yom Kippur? And they last for some amount of time, but then simply I move on, and life usually lapses back into normal. Human nature is, once we move on, we move on. The Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says, this is what we say every day in davening. At the end of Yishtabach, we say, Abocher b'shirei zimra. The Baal Shem loves the shirei zimra. You know what the Baal Shem says? It's not shirei, it's shiarei. Habocher b'shiarei zimra. Ribono shel olam, allow me in life to take the shirayim of the Zimra. We'll say, what are Shirayim? Shirayim are leftovers. Leftovers. That the greatest yesod in life is to take the leftovers of all of your life experiences with you. To never allow the impact of experiences to end when the experience ends. You have to take Shirayim. You have to take leftovers with you. Both from the good as well as from the challenging. The problem so often in life is we don't learn and we don't grow from our experiences because once they're over and we move on. Habocher b'shiyarizim, we have to take the shirayim of every life experience with you. So it appears that, by the time Yom Kippur is over, Yom Kippur is over. And again, I'm building my sukkah, I'm getting my lulav and esrog, I'm moved on, Zman Simcha Seinu, where, we're moving, we're going. And again, it would appear that even if he came back and said, oh, by the way, guys, just want to let everybody know, the string didn't turn red. What would people do? Well, first of all, you have to act from. So, right, if you say, Nebuch, and then what would happen? Then you just go back to business. You just go back. Incredible yesod about just human behavior and how we have to try to avoid that at any cost. Habocher b'shiyarei zimra. Take the shirayim, take the leftovers of your experiences with you throughout life. Incredible. Elohaya magil machzas sahar. So I will say what would happen. By the time the goat got to the middle of the mountain, it already ripped apart. It's so fascinating. Osan ivarim mahein ba'ana. I will say, what is the halacha regarding the limbs of the seir la'azazel? Are they mutter bahana or not? Obviously, you can't eat it because it's dar shchita, but I don't know, whatever. There are a lot of uses for goat limbs, whatever they might be. Right? You could feed it to your animals. Right? You could sell it. Right? So what is the status of those limbs? So Rav Shmuel machlokes. Chad amar mutarin. One said it's mutter bahana. V'chad amar asurin. One said it's asur. So let's analyze. Chad man da amar mutarin. The one who says that it's mutter dichsev bamidbar. Because the Torah says that where does the seer take place? In the midbar, right? Ultimately, again, just like the midbar, Abosai is hefker, right? No one owns anything in the midbar, right? The midbar is hefker, so too the seer is hefker as well. I.e., again, the limbs are not subject to any type of me'ilah. Oman da amar asurin, the one who says that no, the limbs are asur, dichsiv gizeira. Because I will say, interestingly enough, it says Gezerah. Look at Rashi. Now, I will say, Gezerah literally means uninhabited, right? Eretz Gezerah is a reference to the desert where you find the cliff, right? And it's Gezerah. It's you take this here to an uninhabited place. Interestingly enough, however, the Gemara is dashing Gezerah also means like a Gezerah, like a decree. Rashi says Lashon Chomer ve'Isser. So it says that the seir is done by Eretz Gezerah, which means the seir remains asur. Even the limbs, once they come apart, are still considered asur as well. Man damar asur and hain midbar mai avidle. So we'll say, so the one who says that the limbs are asur, what does he darshan from the word midbar? He needs it for the following. Hamidbara bamidbar. But the Torah states the word midbar 3 times in the context of the seir la'azazel. L'rabos nov, the givon shila ubeis ulamin. We'll say to teach us as follows, that halacha l'maisa, wherever there was a mishkan or a mikdash, ultimately, again, there is a chiyuv of a seir la'azazel. So, as long as there is a central house of worship, wherever it is based, Nov, Givon, Shiloh, Beis HaMikdash, there is a din ultimately of Seir La'azazel. V'idach, Chai Gezerah Mai Avidlei. And I will say, the one who darshins Midbar, what does he do with Gezerah? So, Midbar Le'lechidesanya. Gezerah, Ein Gezerah Ela Chatucha. We'll say, what does Gezerah mean? Gezerah means Chatucha, that you can't throw the goat off any cliff, but rather, again, both say Rashi's chatucha, tzuk chatach bezekifa, velo meshupa kolkach. I don't know what you would call like the topographical term over here, but when you have cliffs, there are 2 different types of cliffs. You could have a cliff with a slope, and you could have a cliff with like a sharp, straight edge. So Gezerah teaches me you have to use a straight edge cliff. Straight edge cliff. Davar acher, ein Gezerah ela davar hamisgazer v'yorei. Others say Gezerah means, or both say something that tears apart as it goes down. So as the goat goes down, it's torn apart. Davar acher, because it will say, so I'll also say something amazing about this, just to contemplate. If you notice again, just the incredible dialectic of the Yom Kippur service. On one hand, the part that's done in the Beis Hamikdash is so scripted, and every place is so scripted, right? Sprinkle here, go there, walk into the Kodesh HaKadoshim like this, face in this direction, come in this direction, come to the Mizbeach Hazav this way, walk around it this way. Everything is scripted. Yet here we'll say, which mountain do you go out and throw the seir off of? Which mountain do you throw the seir off of? We'll say the truth is, if you notice again, by the way, we don't identify a particular mountain, we describe a particular type of cliff. And the Mishnah describes the cliff they used to use. It was 6 miles out of Yerushalayim. But if you notice again, halacha l'maisa, there's no particular mountain you must use. But rather, again, so isn't it interesting that one part of the avodah is so scripted, and the other part of the avodah, kind of you have a little bit of latitude to figure out where to do it. And isn't that our Yiddishkeit as well? There are things you have to do in certain ways, and then there are areas in which there is a certain level of freedom of expression, but also the yisod, that wherever you are, even outside of the confines of the Mikdash, even in the Midbar, even Eretz Gezerah, you have to take your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu with you wherever you go. The relationship doesn't just apply in the scripted, defined areas of the Mikdash. But even when you're in the desert, even when you're Be'eretz Gezerah, your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu must follow you along. And it may be unscripted in those areas, but you have to figure that out as well. Incredible yisod. Davar acher, Gezerah. What does Gezerah mean? Shema tomar ma'aseh tohu. Maybe you'll look at this whole thing of the Sir Mishtalech and you'll say, this is a little bit crazy. Right? What are we doing? We're pushing goats off cliffs. Right? Well, so, sometimes you think about people like looking in. There's a lot of things we do in Yiddishkeit that look a little bit strange, that might be hard to explain to others. If you think about it, this to a certain degree takes the cake. Right? On the holiest day of the year, so what are you guys doing? We're pushing goats off cliffs. Right? And and it's a major part of our service. Right? It's a major part of our service. Maybe you'll look at this and you'll say to yourself, that's a little bit strange. Talmud Lomar, Ani Hashem. The Bazik says, I am Hashem. Ani Hashem gizarti ve'im lecha reshus lahar harbaim. I commanded you to do this. I commanded you to do this, and don't ask questions. You see, Rabbi saying, isn't this incredible? Part of the avoda of Yom Kippur is pledging our allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And pledging your allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not manifest itself in following the things that make sense to you, or that you like, or that speak to you. But the greatest pledge of allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu are doing the things that do not make any sense to me. And in fact, maybe even seem a little bit strange to me. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me to do it, so I do it. That's part of the avoda of Yom Kippur, to pledge my allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm in this. I don't do the things I do because I like it, because I want to, because I believe in it, because I do it because you ask me to do it. So on the holiest day of the year, you tell me I have to push a goat off the cliff, I will push a goat off the cliff. Amar Rava, Mistabra Commander Mutar. So back to our previous machlokas. It seems to be clear according to the opinion who says that the limbs are mutter. Lo amra Torah shalach letakala. Because we'll say if the limbs are not mutter, what's going to happen? Somebody on the bottom of that cliff might not realize that was the Azazel goat. They may come across limbs, and again, on a basic level, want to feed it to their animals. So you're going to set someone up to be in a state of Isser. It must be that once you throw the goat off the cliff, because we'll say essentially once you throw it off the cliff, the avodah is done. Once the avodah is done, it's no longer going to be subject to me'ilah. Tana Rabbanon, Azazel shehei oz v'kasha. So we'll say now a little bit of description. It calls it Azazel. Right? Azazel is the name of the desert. So why does it call it Azazel? To tell you that the terrain and the mountain must be oz v'kasha, which really means hard and rugged. Yachol b'yishuv. You might have thought you could do this here Azazel in an inhabited area. Talmud Lomar b'midbar. Therefore, the Torah says b'midbar. U'minayin shebatzuk. How do you have to use a cliff? Talmud Lomar gezerah. So what's that? Gezerah means again jagged, cut off. It means uninhabited, but the Gemara is using it to also mean jagged. Tanya idach Azazel kasha shebaharim. Azazel means you have to find the most rugged of the mountains. V'chinu omer. Azazel shemechaper al ma'asa uza va'azal. So we'll say, what does it mean, azazel? That it's mechaper, it atones for the sin, ultimately again of uza and azal. We'll say, what is that talking about? If you actually, before we'll come back to Uzan Azal just a moment, I just want to end off with this piece. So turn Abanon, es mishpati tasu, right? You shall go and perform on mishpatim. So the Gemara says, dvarim she'omali nichtavu. Actually, we'll say, we'll stop over here. We'll pick up with masa mechaber masa uzav uzal va'azal emirat Hashem tomorrow to continue a bit more in the seir la'azazel, and then emirat Hashem again. We'll continue with the next mission as well. Shkoyach. Let me just stop the camera. Incredible, no?
I need to ask you this question, which I mean, it's probably simple answer.